Bloom's Revised Taxonomy, as demonstrated through a high school physics lesson, by Emily Paulson. Bloom's taxonomy is a classification of levels of intellectual behavior important for learning that range from low-order thinking to high-order thinking skills. The original version of the taxonomy featured a list of nouns: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. It has since been revised to feature action verbs that correspond to the nouns: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. You'll notice that the highest two levels have switched places. First, I will go through and define each level of Bloom's Revised Taxonomy in order. Then I will go through the physics detective lesson and relate each portion of the lesson to a level of Bloom's. Remembering, the lowest level, is when memory is used to produce definitions, facts, or lists, or recite or retrieve material. Understanding is constructing meaning from different types of functions, be they written or graphic. Applying is carrying out or using a procedure. Analyzing is breaking material or concepts into parts, determining how the parts relate or interrelate to one another or to an overall structure or purpose. Evaluating is making judgments based on criteria and standards through checking and critiquing. Creating, the highest level, is putting elements together to form a coherent or functional whole. Now let's take a look at what these look like in the classroom, a physics classroom to be more specific. In this lesson, students will write a script and record a video of an episode of Physics Detective, in which they will act like detectives and use physics to solve a mystery. I'd like to note that the level of Bloom's taxonomy do not appear in order during this lesson, and that's okay. Just because the upper levels are higher order thinking does not mean they necessarily have to come after the lower levels. Similarly, it does not mean that lower level activities have no purpose when used after higher order thinking activities. The first activity in the lesson is a strategy called Request, which stands for reciprocal questioning. The activity begins with students asking the teacher questions about the material. These can be clarifying questions or questions that go deeper into the material. In the next step, the roles are reversed. The teacher asks the students questions. It is during this step that the students demonstrate remembering and understanding, depending on the question. If the teacher asks a student to produce a formula, definition, or figure, the student is remembering. If the teacher asks a student to describe why something works or to define a term in their own words, the student is demonstrating understanding. The next activity is for students to evaluate online resources to use for their project. This is the evaluation level of Bloom's because the students will make judgments based on the reliability of scientific texts online, using standards and previous knowledge. This is also an important transferable skill that students will be able to use for the rest of their lives. Now the students will use the reliable sources they have found to aid them in writing their script. For a portion of the script, the students will be required to use the strategy called Reader's Theater. For this strategy, students must put the text in the form of a dialogue without changing it. Recall that analyzing is breaking material or concepts into parts, determining how the parts relate or interrelate to one another or to an overall structure or purpose. This is exactly what the students must do to create a meaningful dialogue from the text. One might think that the creating level of Bloom's is when students create a video of their episode. This is technically a creation, but the level of Bloom's as it applies to physics is when the students create a problem they can solve with their limited knowledge of physics to use as their mystery in the episode. It is then that the students are truly creating a new conception of the concepts they have learned. And finally, in writing the script and recording the video, students must apply the concepts and procedures they have learned to actually solve the problem they have created. This is the applying level of Bloom's. So there you have it, one lesson that reaches all of the levels of Bloom's Revised Taxonomy in a fun, engaging way. But remember, not every lesson needs to cover all the levels. and lower order thinking skills don't have to be used before higher order thinking skills. So keep these examples in mind when you're planning your next lesson. You never know what your students can accomplish until you push them to their limits.